Hey guys, welcome back to Critical Flick. Today I'll be reviewing Horizon An American Saga Chapter 1. This is the first chapter of Kevin Costner's epic Western saga that is supposed to take place over 4 films, and I have to say, after seeing the first movie, I don't see how this makes it into 4 films. I didn't hate this movie by any means. I think it's really well done. I think the acting, the cinematography is fantastic, but it is so ambitious and such a slog to get through by the end that for me at least, I can't imagine watching another 9 hours of this. It's weird. I know this is going to sound like a bit of a rant review from me, but I do feel like this almost felt like it should have just been a miniseries. It felt like I watched 3 to 4 episodes of a show. It didn't feel like I watched a movie by any means. And that's not to take away from actually how well done the film is. Like I said, this would be fantastic as a series. I think I would have fully enjoyed watching it in that kind of format, but it's telling 4 almost very distinct stories that don't feel connected at all, at least in this first chapter. We know that obviously things are going to come together, and by the end of this series, it's all going to come to a head at Horizon. We're all going to be there. All our characters are going to tell their stories of navigating kind of the expanse of the West and the story of America pre and post Civil War, and I think it is going to be really epic and great. But watching the first film, it's going to be hard to go back to the theater, at least for me, to watch the next couple ones. A lot of that has to do with the pacing and structure of the story, like I had mentioned, because telling very distinct stories about characters that are all over the map when it comes to kind of their locations and what they're doing, it felt like I never had an opportunity, even at 3 hours long, to really fully connect with one character in particular. There are some moments that really stand out from others. Some of the characters I'm very invested in. I think that Kevin Costner and his character and the relationship with the woman that he's helping escape kind of her circumstances is really compelling and interesting. I do think that the events that take place at Horizon and the complexity of the relationships between the Native Americans and the settlers moving west is really interesting. And I think that the other story about the Conestoga wagons and the traveling across the Santa Fe Trail to get to where they're going is interesting. But having this all take place in one film, it felt overbearing, and at times I just honestly wanted it to end. And you'll have to bear with me, this might be a little bit longer review because I want to dive into each individual story because I think they can almost be talked about as individual films. In the beginning of the story, we see a character arriving at this area Horizon. He's following this flyer that he saw to go find land, to go find a new home. And when he gets there, he discovers that a group of settlers were killed by Native Americans because they are encroaching on their territory. They're driving out their livestock. Obviously, things that we know and understand about the expansion to the west. And then you see others arrive that just don't seem to care. They see their graves, they see what happened, and they said, we're going to continue to settle on this land. We're going to push forward, kind of manifest destiny. We're going to keep doing this thing. And again, we see a Indian raid that comes in and they massacre women and children and everyone, and it's horrible and it's intense and it's really well shot. I think it's one of the most visceral scenes I've seen from a Western film. And then it takes a very unique move of pulling back and explaining why this happens. And maybe you can create this understanding of the violence and why these things just continue to grow and they snowball, and it just creates this conflict that goes back and forth and back and forth. And it tells it, and I think in a very tasteful and in a very interesting way. It doesn't take one side or the other, which I think is the right route to take in this situation. So I do like that it tells this story, and I was fully engrossed in this. It's telling the story of this mother and daughter who survived the raid. It tells the story of a boy who escapes and he wants to get revenge, and you're following the mother and daughter as they move into this military encampment with Sam Worthington's character, and they have that kind of relationship going on and growing love from the situation, but also growing hate from the situation. So I think that's really well done. And then we'll cut to a completely different story. In the filming of these scenes, in particular, having it take place in the San Pedro Valley, they look gorgeous. This movie is so well shot. The little details of the set dressings, the costuming, the props, it all works. You feel like you are thrown into this frontier town, this Western town. And then, like I said, it's just something that is so big and grand, and it just cuts away, and you feel like you can never connect to this world that they're in. And maybe through the second, third, possibly 4th film, we'll have more of a story, and maybe watching this as an episodic kind of thing might be really interesting to do. I would not be surprised if this somehow ends up being cut up into episodes. I know we've seen this in the past with, I think it was Australia, that got re-released as a show. I could really see this being re-released as a show and being really popular. You could tell this was really a love letter from Kevin Costner, something he's always wanted to do. You can tell there's passion and care taken about telling these stories, and it is a truly American story of all sides, all Americans. And I think that's something that's really special, and I think it's worth checking out for that. it's just a rough watch. The second major story that's taking place in this goes into the Wyoming territory and the Montana territory, kind of the more northern areas. It's going back and forth in there with the snow, and it also looks very good and it's very well done. And I do actually kind of like the idea of these very unique settings, seeing these different parts of the wild edges of America at that time. The story that takes place in this part is about a woman who is escaping this family that's trying to track her down because something she did in her past, and they've been tracking her through this wild territory, trying to find her and bring her back and bring back her child. And that's when Kevin Costner arrives. He's kind of this horse trader. He's this guy who's got a little bit of something going on the side. He's obviously not the best guy in the world. He's kind of a dangerous guy. He clearly is someone that you don't want to mess with. And then they end up coming in conflict with one another. A woman who's not the woman that they're trying to capture, but here's her friend who takes the child, and they start tracking them as well. Kevin Costner creates this kind of relationship with her, and he's trying to get her out of that situation while being tracked by these guys. There's one scene in the story that I think is really well done, and it's very classic Western. And that's the part where Kevin Costner's character Hayes is confronted by Caleb, who's one of the sons of a man who was injured by the woman that they're tracking down, and you have this kind of classic Western standoff. And I think it's really reminiscent of some of the films I loved growing up, and I think that is one of the kind of peaks in this film. The actor that plays Caleb, you may know from Stranger Things. He played Vecna, and I think he does a really good job of playing kind of that crazy Western character. We always see that. There's in these Western films, there's always kind of this wild card guy who just takes full advantage of the untamed nature of the West and just wants to shoot people and kill people and doesn't care about anything, and he's like a little bit off. And I think he plays that character really well, and I think Kevin Costner's more stoic character against this kind of zany, unhinged wild card with some of the best banter back and forth and some of the best dialogue in the film. And then we jump into kind of the third story that's happening in this movie. That follows a wagon trail that has Luke Wilson's character as kind of the leader of this group of people that's traveling across the West, trying to get out to Horizon. They want to stake their claim like a lot of people at that time. And it also has a subplot about an English artist who's there with his wife, and they don't really fit in because they're kind of almost like aristocrat type people, and they're not hard workers, and it creates that conflict of these kind of very grizzled people that are traveling out to the West and these other artisans that are going with them. And I think that's also an interesting story about all the people that went to the West. We think of it all as, you know, miners or all of people that are going out as cattle rustlers and all these things. This is more about everyone going out there and the idea of chasing that last untamed thing and that kind of American dream and being able to create our own thing and start anew and the things that people love about the Old West. And I think that it captures that really well in this story, but it is so detached from the others, and you never really feel like enough is being built in this part of the story in particular. I felt like whenever it would cut to them, I wasn't as fully invested as I were in the other two stories. So I would like to see maybe moving forward in the series, we'll get a little bit more to connect with these people and maybe understand a little bit more. It felt a little more generic than the other two. So at the end of the day, this film was a little bit of a mixed bag. At 3 hours long, like I said, for me in particular, and maybe it's just me, I would love to hear what you thought if you saw it. It felt really long. It felt very disjointed having these different stories. I think it would have been served really well as like a 3-part or 4-part miniseries, not just a 3-hour movie. I think they absolutely nailed the setting of America in 1863 and kind of the conflicts that are happening, the expansion that's happening, kind of the wild, untamed nature of all the things. I think a lot of the characters are really interesting, and I would love to see more from these characters. But like I said, I never felt like I got to connect enough with them to care enough to be like, oh, I cannot wait for the next one. There is one thing that this film did at the very end that, at least for me, I didn't enjoy. I've never seen a film do this, and I guess there's a good reason why they don't do it, is at the very end, you get about, I would say, a minute and a half, 2-minute kind of montage, almost like a really quick cut trailer of what's going to happen in the second film. And I mean, I don't think they've really fully started the third film yet, but you're seeing flashes of all the stuff that's going to happen in the second film that looks like it might be interesting, but it's just like, it just flashed on screen and you're seeing all these things happening and you're like, wait, what? I'm like, I've been connected to these characters for 3 hours and now I'm just getting these huge events that are just flashing in front of me, and I'm supposed to just, what am I supposed to think about that? Maybe it's supposed to get me excited for the next movie, or maybe it's supposed to like let people know there's gonna be another movie, because this movie has zero ending. It really just ends, and you couldn't really ever consider this a complete film, in my opinion. And I think it is one of the most unique films that I've ever seen that just ends, and you just don't get really any resolution with anything. Maybe the closest thing I can think of is the first Lord of the Rings, because like when I was a kid, I remember I watched it and I was like, wait, that's the end of the movie? But obviously we knew there were other films coming. This one, we know there are other films coming, but it doesn't feel like a complete movie at all. It feels like I said, it feels like I watched 3 to 4 episodes of a 12-part miniseries. And as a moviegoer, that's a little bit rough. I would definitely recommend, if you're a fan of Westerns, definitely check it out. It's really well done. If you're a Western fan, I think you'll be satisfied. Maybe wait till it's at home and maybe break it up into a couple of sessions, but it's definitely worth watching, especially just for the way that it's done, the passion behind it, the production of it. I think the acting's solid. So if I were to rate Horizons Chapter 1, I would give it a 6 out of 10. I think if it was done differently, I think overall just the editing, the pacing, like I said, if this was a show, maybe I'd probably rate it higher. Maybe I'll rate it higher when I see the other films, but I'm watching it and I almost have to rate it an incomplete at the end of the day. Definitely not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely could have been done in a way that would have made it a lot more enjoyable. So if you end up checking this one out, let me know what you thought about it. I would love to hear what people think about this movie. Because like I said, maybe I ranted a little bit and raved a little bit, but I want to hear if you really loved it or maybe you really disliked it. Maybe the overall nature of it was too much like it was for me. I always love to hear people's opinions. Leave those comments down below. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. See you guys next time.